Hello and welcome to Art Discourse. My name is Kyle and this is my partner Chrissy, and on this show we answer questions that have been sent in to us from viewers. We try to answer them to the best of our abilities, and we really don't know what we're going to get each time, but let's find out what this week's question is.
This week's question is, how does one know how to price their work? How does one know how to price their work? How does one know how to price their work?
Hello, it's me again. I'm calling from a faraway land. Pick up the phone. I'm calling from a different time zone. Heard you are a pretty good source for major topics in art discourse. Hello, I'll leave my questions as a message at the dial tone.
Okay,
Big bad world of art pricing. It's all relative, just like time. Right? I love it.
I think that I would like to approach this question the same way that we do so when we do professional practice talks to like universities and things like that, and I think I want to approach it in like the most logical way that I can think of. When we set out to price artwork, we think about the numbers that go into it. And by that I mean we think about our overhead, we think about our expenses every month, we think about how long it takes and how much it costs to make that thing. And then usually some sort of profit on top of that.
For the most part, like, we're thinking about it in like a very like systematic sense. And we've tested it against a lot of different like other barometers, like other people's approaches to pricing. It sort of comes out about the same for the most part. So the system works.
Okay, so let's talk about what goes into there. Thank you for watching to this point in the video. If you're just here for the formula, here it is. If you want to hang out and actually talk about some of the stuff, we're going to talk about that. When it comes to beginning to price your artwork, the place that we start is understanding where your finances are and where your monthly expenses lay. In order to figure out how much something costs, you have to understand how much you need to earn. So the very first thing we talk about is our overhead, and this encompasses your rent, your utilities, your hydro, your phone bill, if you have a student line of credit, and kind of any other standing loans and things like that, and monthly bill payments, things that you would call fixed expenses.
Yeah.
So by finding out those numbers first, you can understand how much money you have to earn every month. I'm going to preface this talk by saying, like, we are thinking about this as a artist who makes their sole income from art. There's much more to the conversation when it comes to being an artist and actually making a living from being an artist, where I think many people often have a little bit of income from art, from grants, from teaching, from projects, from workshops. But for our purpose of our example, we are going to talk about artists who make all of their money from selling artwork.
We're also looking at this as like sort of like direct sale from artist to consumer. So if you're working with a gallery or, you know, there's like a third party in there, then like the pricing structure would be very different. So like the system that we're going to talk about right now is what we use for like figuring out like how much in addition to prints we're going to need to make in order to like recoup the investment of materials and time into like making that. Like if we got asked to do a certain type of job, we usually crunch the numbers through this to make sure that like whatever the budget is for that particular job, we can say, yeah, we can do that.
Okay, let's talk about amortization. This is your capital assets. These are items that you buy that you can't bill out for like full total for one client. There are things like your MacBook, your car, your easel, your really expensive equipment piece that you use in your studio. These things, you can bill them out based upon the expense amortized out over a period of time. Confusing, I know. Okay, so let's take an example. I have a MacBook. That MacBook cost me $3,000. In 3 years, I would like to buy a new MacBook. I have to earn back that $3,000 in 3 years. So we take that $3,000 and we divide it by 36. Now this gives us a new number. This number is how much we have to put towards a new MacBook every month. Okay, say you are an artist and you're making one single artwork every month. That means that one artwork needs to incorporate that little tiny bit of money for that MacBook every month. Now say if you make 4 arts every month, each one of those 4 arts every month will incorporate a quarter of that number. into it. This is a very kind of straightforward way of thinking about it. Your jobs and projects won't necessarily break down to being exactly 1 month long or 1 week long. You can use a formula or math to divide out the number of hours, the cost by the number of hours, and you can find out for every hour you work, you have to charge out X number of dollars. To recap, we've talked about our fixed expenses, we've talked a bit about amortizing out capital assets, and now when it comes to actually understanding how to price that art, there are two major components. One is materials and one is time. The first one is materials. When you are making an artwork, record all the materials that you use. Not just the price of the canvas and not just some arbitrary price of paint, but be methodical about it. If you say use green tape in your project to mask out something, how much of that roll of green tape do you think that you used? If that tape costs $3.50 and you used 1/10 of it, think about that price and make sure that you're incorporating those prices into it. If you don't, you'll find that you're losing out a couple of dollars every project, and over the course of a year, that tends to add up. So when it comes to materials, what I recommend is either before you begin the project or afterwards, it doesn't matter. You can price out artwork for making a quote or for retroactively, I guess. I want you to envision and kind of see yourself going through all of the motions, what materials you touch, what things you activate, what things you bring into the project, and record all of it. And being as methodical as you can will help give you an accurate price. When it comes to things that are more difficult, such as maybe you're a painter and you use paint, but you don't buy a tube of paint for every single new canvas. What you can do is you can use a gram scale. You can weigh the tube of paint before you begin your project and weigh the tube of paint afterwards. You know, the tube of paint originally weighs 100 grams, and then after the project, you have used 10 grams of it. You know that in this particular artwork, you should charge it for 10% of that paint tube. And apply this to all of your paints, any inks that you use, anything that kind of has a volume that you can weigh. You can use a logical formula to figure out how much you use, and you can charge out for that. Now, when it comes to all of the materials, when you do summarize them all, you know, everything from that scrap of green tape to the bits of newsprint to the quarter of a tube of paint, you should be putting a markup on your materials. And this means whatever that total is, you should add 10 to 15%. 15% is kind of a baseline industry standard across many, industries. And it's a pretty good place to start. If you don't feel comfortable with that, maybe a 10%. But you should put that in there because you never know. Some project down the line, you might need a little bit more money, and this gives you a bit of flexibility so that as you progress, you might be able to buy another tube of paint, an extra color, or an extra thing. If you're only ever covering the material costs in the price, you're never going to expand your business.
Now, you don't have to weigh everything out. We're very strict with ourselves when it comes to printmaking because we get asked to do a lot of different types of jobs, and some of those jobs are commercial. It can be alarming how quickly ink can evaporate. You think it's going to be $10 worth of ink, but then when you weigh it out, it's actually $80 worth of ink. So we've started adopting this because it has been hugely beneficial to us. So after we have the materials priced out, we take a lot of care in thinking about how long projects take. And again, this is kind of the nature of the job that we have. We're usually juggling a lot of things, and usually the projects that we're taking on, that we're making in these quotes, are kind of time restricted. And so people want to know, how long is this going to take? Murals, for example, often function in this way. People want to know what's going to be the length of time you're going to need to make this. We try to pay attention to our hours. We use a system called Active Collab pretty often for recording hours, but sometimes we just set a timer on our phone while we're doing something so that we notice how long something's taking us. So then in our project planner, we break down those hours and we think of everything. How many emails are we going to be doing? How many meetings are we going to have? How are we going to be traveling to the site to do something? And then we align those with sort of job categories. So we kind of use Carfac fees as our industry standard for thinking about an hourly wage for a lot of projects. And that generally seems to fall somewhere between $50 to $80 an hour, depending on the project. And we'll link to the Carfac fee calculator so that you can look at that. But basically, if we're doing administrative jobs and they're emails that still require some knowledge and skill of the project, then maybe we're charging $17 or $20 an hour, something that we would hire an assistant to do. If we're doing basic cleanup, tidying the studio or sort of basic prep, then maybe that's something we could hire a part-time worker to do. And so we might charge just an hourly standard living wage rate for that. But if it's something that we went to school for and we've been honing the craft for a long time, and it's really our hand that makes it work, then we're going to charge a higher rate for that, somewhere in that Carfac range of like $50 to $80 depending on the job. So we have in our calculator like the ability to just basically drag and drop different types of categories that have different price values associated, and we think about the whole project and we do our best to try to calculate in advance how much is this going to take. Sometimes that doesn't work out. We have had jobs where we thought we would be doing admin work for like maybe 10 hours and it ended up being 80 hours. And so it's good to like keep those records, because then you can see like, okay, jobs of this particular scale actually require a lot more like group meetings and conversations, and we didn't anticipate that. And we're eating obviously the cost of those lost wages. Now we have all of our materials planned out for this particular project, and we have the time we think it's going to take for this particular project.
Now, combined with what we talked about earlier, which is our fixed expenses, plus our variable expenses, will actually start to give us a kind of expense for this project. Say you go through all of this effort, you write down all of your materials, you write down all of the hours that the project's going to take, or you're doing this retroactively and you wrote down all the hours it did take, and you kind of come to this conclusion. Now, like, the math gets really crunchy and really particular, which is why I'd recommend that you use like Excel or a spreadsheet kind of program like Google Sheets to kind of work and do the math for you, where you can plop in some numbers and it calculates it. Because once you start breaking it down to like, this project took me 73 hours and I'm only working 156 hours this month, like the math just becomes like incredibly arduous to deal with. It's math. It's really hard to talk about this stuff on the fly. So like, let's actually use some examples here. So like here we have our expenses, followed by kind of the capital assets for the month, followed by the materials for this particular project, followed by the number of hours broken down into different categories and assigned to different wages, and now we can synthesize those things. So in a month, say if we have indicated that, let's take a typical workday where we work 40 hours a week, and we do that 4 times a month, that's 160 hours, we can divide all of our expenses out by 160. For every hour that is worked towards a project or whatever, this is the number that you add into that. So if a project takes 76 hours, it is 76 of that 160 hours. So that project has to have this incorporated in it. And so you go through, you add all these things together, and this is how you get a very logical price. I think that's kind of like the rough how to price an artwork. There's obviously, at the end of this, when you put that price in, and like, you're gonna be scared about that number, because we all are, because this is the reality. If you had hired a plumber or hired a carpenter to come and do work on your house, you know that they are charging out for that truck, they're charging out for the tools, they're charging out for any sort of training, they're charging out a little bit more because it's like their company, they have somebody in the office that also needs to get paid. You know that they're charging out for these things, and as artists, we need to do the same. I'm gonna say that like many of you might clap back and say like, hey, like you can just arbitrarily price your work for 4 or 5 grand. It gets more complicated once you step into the world of like, I have fame, I work with a gallery, or I am in demand. All those things are much, like there's many ways to price your artwork. This isn't the way to price your artwork. Yeah. It is a way that we approach it, and that's what you would charge. And you'd put a profit on it, and always put a profit on it. Because the reality is like, if a project takes you 36 hours, and you think it's gonna take you a whole week, you're not gonna find another project to make up that last 4 hours. And the reality of, you know, having back-to-back-to-back projects is absolutely insane. Like, it's great if you're in that position, but it's unlikely that you're going to have back-to-back projects. A little bit of job profit helps to buffer out in those times when your workflow is like really heavy and then it peters off to being really slow and dead. And that will help kind of like lessen that curve.
The other thing with that is that there are going to be situations where you might be asked to work on a project that doesn't have like a budget or a good budget, but the project itself is really interesting. So if you have some buffer from other things that you've done, then you know you're going to be able to take on something else because you've like accounted for having some additional spending so that you can take on more interesting or maybe more like adventurous projects. We'll link to Shannon Gerard's conversation with one of our flat files because she talks a little bit about doing that when she's thinking about craft sales. But like Kyle said, it's so variable. I mean, this happens in any industry. Like, you know, you start out and you might be working at this tier. If you get really famous, then all of a sudden you're working here and you're getting paid this much. Like, demand impacts the cost, and then scarcity impacts cost. So, you know, if you're working on a series of prints and you run it through the calculator and it looks like at the end of it, every print is gonna cost $400 because you only want to make an edition of 5, then, I mean, maybe people will pay $400 for your print, and that is amazing and congratulations for you, but it's less likely maybe, and so you might have to up your edition so that they actually only cost $100 each or something like that. So it's a way for us to sort of like navigate where do we feel comfortable, where's our place in the art industry and what people are willing to spend on our work, and also what can the market that we're working in bear. Like, we like to make affordable prints so that everyday folks can purchase them from our website. And so there is a level of what is comfortable in that space for people spending wise, and we want to make sure we're working within that market. That's the market we've chose to work in. So you have to, take those things into consideration as well.
It's a tool. It's not the be all to end all. It's to help get you to a place where you can synthesize those numbers, analyze them, and then make an educated guess and figure out what you need to do. If that's cut down your overhead or lower your price, increase the edition, or if that's like you need to hustle harder in some steps, or is that to like look back at like your hours spent and reduce hours in like a very laborious process.
Or maybe hire someone because you're actually not very good at that step, so it's taking you 3 times as long as, you're actually going to reduce costs if you pay someone else to do it for you.
It's a complicated conversation. This is just one of the ways, this is how we go about it. I hope this helps. If you find number crunching difficult, we do have a project planner for sale through our website, or you can become a member of our Patreon page and receive it for free that way. Yeah, it's not the easiest road to navigate. Think about it logically, break the things down, and try to think about all the steps that go into it. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is start recording how many hours it takes you to make something.
Until next time.